They trapped her. Not because she was dangerous, but because she was generous. Every tear became gold, and every cry made them richer. But this is not how the story began. It began with a blessing, but it did not begin with cruelty. Long before the river fell silent, long before gold replaced gratitude, there was a village that lived on the edge of survival, and yet still believed in tomorrow. They built their homes beside an ancient river, a river so old that even the elders, whose memories stretched farther than most, could not remember when it first began to flow. The river was not loud. It did not roar or rage. It simply moved, steadily, patiently, like a breath that had never stopped breathing. Every morning, the villagers woke to its sound, and every night they fell asleep, believing that as long as the river flowed, they would endure. The people were poor, but they were not desperate. They worked the land with bare hands. They fished with nets repaired more times than anyone could count. They shared meals, even when portions were small. When the river gave them fish, they bowed their heads in thanks. When the harvest was thin, they endured it together. They believed the river watched them, and for a long time, it did. Then, one morning, something changed. The fishermen returned from the water with nets heavier than they had ever known, so heavy that two men struggled to pull them ashore, so heavy that the ropes cut into their palms. At first, no one celebrated. Fear arrived before joy. They thought the nets had caught stones or debris dragged in by the current. But when the sun rose higher and its light struck what clung to the ropes, they froze. It was not stone. It was not mud. It was gold. Not coins, not jewelry, dust, fine, shimmering, alive. It clung to their nets and fingers, catching the light in a way that made breathing feel dangerous. The fishermen stared at one another, uncertain whether to laugh or kneel. Some whispered prayers. Others stepped back, afraid to touch it again. No one spoke loudly. They had learned long ago that miracles demanded caution. By midday, the entire village had gathered at the riverbank. Elders examined the nets. Children reached toward the glow before being pulled back by worried hands. They asked questions no one could answer. Where had it come from? Why now? And at what cost? It was then that the children saw her. At first, they thought it was shadow, a trick of light beneath the water's surface. Then they saw the movement. Hair, long and black, drifting like smoke beneath the river. Skin that shimmered faintly, as if moonlight had been pressed into flesh. The children screamed. Adults rushed forward, expecting a crocodile or something worse. What they found was neither. She did not rise suddenly. She did not thrash or cry out. She simply opened her eyes, deep, dark, ancient. And in that moment, the river itself seemed to lean toward her. No one spoke. Even the birds went silent. They lifted her gently from the water, as if afraid she might dissolve at the touch. Her body was cool, but not cold. Alive, but not human. They wrapped her in cloth. They lowered their voices. Some knelt. Others stepped back, trembling. No one dared claim her. They called her a gift, a miracle, a blessing. And for a while, she was. Where she sat by the river, the water shimmered more brightly. Fish multiplied in the nets, returning so heavy that even children helped drag them ashore. Crops thickened in the fields, leaves darkened, fruits swelled. Women who had waited years for children felt life stir within them, and when she cried, when sorrow or memory touched her, her tears fell into the earth, and gold appeared. Not in heaps, not in floods, just enough. Enough to ease hunger, enough to repair roofs, enough to soften hard lives. The villagers praised the river. They praised the miracle. They sang. They danced. They never asked why her tears carried such power. At night, when the fires burned low, she returned to the water. She never spoke of where she came from. She never asked for anything. She listened. and in her listening she learned more about the villagers than they ever realized. She heard their laughter, their complaints, their secrets. She heard the first comparisons. Why does she cry for him and not for me? Why does her gift come so easily? Why should we struggle when the river can be made to give more? She heard gratitude slowly turn into expectation. Still, she stayed. Still, she gave. Because generosity, when it is pure, does not recognize danger. But beneath the surface of the river, something ancient began to withdraw. Not in anger, not in warning, quietly, the way water recedes before a flood. And the village, blinded by blessing, did not notice. They did not notice that the river's song was growing softer. They did not notice that gratitude was being replaced by hunger. They did not notice that what had been given freely was already being measured, counted, claimed. And this was how the blessing began. Blessings do not collapse all at once. They erode, slowly, quietly, almost politely. At first, the villagers were grateful. They brought her food. They sang songs by the river. They spoke softly around her, as if her presence itself might shatter if handled too roughly. They called her gift. They called her miracle. They called her answer. And in the beginning, they meant it. But gratitude is fragile when it is fed by abundance. Soon the gold no longer shocked them. It became familiar. Hands that once trembled now reached for it confidently. Eyes that once widened in awe now narrowed in calculation. They began to notice patterns. She cried when she was sad. And when she cried, gold appeared. That was when curiosity took its first step toward greed. One man stayed behind one evening. He waited until the fires died low and the others returned to their homes. He approached the river quietly, as though afraid the water itself might hear him thinking. He knelt, not in worship, in need. He told her a story about loss, about failure, about how life had passed him by. She listened, and when sorrow moved her, her eyes filled with tears. The man watched them fall, and when gold formed at his feet, his breath caught. He left richer than he arrived, and he told no one. But secrets do not survive success. The next night, another man came, then another. They learned to cry convincingly, to shape their voices around sadness, to perform grief. She listened to all of them. She cried for many of them, and each tear rewarded them. What had once been gratitude was becoming a method. She noticed the change before they did, how their voices sharpened, how their thanks shortened, how fewer people asked how she felt. They stopped bringing offerings. They stopped singing. They started waiting. She warned them, softly. She told them the river could only give what it could carry. She told them that water, when forced beyond its depth, breaks its banks. They laughed. They told her she worried too much. They told her blessings were meant to be used. They reminded her that she had come to them. That was when gratitude turned into entitlement. They stopped asking. They began expecting. When she did not cry one evening, they grew restless. When she turned away, they grew offended. When she asked for rest, they grew angry, because people who believe they deserve a gift do not respond well to limits. They gathered quietly, not in chaos, not in rage, but calmly. They spoke of fairness, of shared prosperity, of making sure no one was left behind. And in the language of fairness, they justified cruelty. They built the cage, not to punish her, to control her. They told themselves it was necessary. They told themselves it was for the good of the village. They told themselves she would understand. People always do this before crossing a line. When they placed her inside the cage, she did not scream. She did not fight. She only looked at them. And for a moment, some of them hesitated. Then someone reached forward, and the hesitation ended. They forced her to cry. Not all at once, not violently, just enough. enough to make the gold fall, enough to keep the blessing flowing. Gold hit the ground, and something inside the village broke permanently. They cheered, they danced, they scooped wealth from the earth with hands that no longer shook. They never noticed the river growing darker. They never noticed the water growing still. They never noticed that the song they once heard every morning had stopped. Because greed is loud, and silence does not compete well with celebration. Night after night, they returned to the cage, and night after night, the gold came. But each tear cost more than the last. Her glow dimmed, her strength faded, and beneath the river's surface, something ancient withdrew further. The villagers told themselves this was success. They told themselves this was wisdom. They told themselves this was how the world worked. They did not realize they were no longer being blessed. They were being measured. And when the river finally fell silent, no one noticed. They were too busy counting. The river did not roar. It did not rage. It did not throw thunder into the sky or send lightning to announce itself. Because the most terrifying judgment is not the one that screams. It's the one that arrives without needing permission. That night, the village celebrated harder than ever. Gold dust was no longer something they stored carefully. It was something they wore. Faces shimmered. Necks carried beads heavy enough to change posture. Even children played with gold the way children once played with pebbles. Drums beat until the air felt swollen. Laughter climbed over rooftops like it owned the place. And near the river, the cage sat in the dark, as ordinary to them now as a stool or a clay pot. The mermaid was still inside. She barely moved. Her glow had faded into something faint and tired. Her eyes, once deep as night water, looked like they had been waiting too long. But the villagers didn't look at her face anymore. They looked at what came after it. The tears, the gold. That was all they saw. Only one man stood apart. An old storyteller who used to sit by the water in the early days, listening to the river like it was speaking. He watched the celebration and felt something cold in his bones. Not fear, a knowing. He walked to the riverbank and stared at the water. It was too still. Not peaceful still, dead still, like an eye that refuses to blink. He whispered, almost to himself, "The river has stopped singing." No one heard him. Even if they did, they wouldn't have cared. Then morning came, and something was wrong. The villagers woke and went to the river the way they always did now, expecting, demanding, certain. But the first shout was not a celebration. It was panic. The cage was empty. At first, they thought it was a trick. They rushed closer. They checked the ropes. They inspected the wood. The cage had not been opened carefully. It looked abandoned, as if it had become meaningless in a single night. The mermaid was gone. And for the first time in a long time, the village felt a fear that gold could not soften. They searched the river's surface. Nothing. They searched the forest edge. Nothing. They shouted at the water. They insulted it. They begged it. They threatened it. But the river did not answer. It simply moved forward, quietly, as if the village had never existed at all. That's when the whispers began. "She's hiding her powers. She took the blessing away from us." She went to another village. But one whisper rose louder than the rest, because it felt too accurate to ignore. Maybe she was never meant to be owned. By midday, the sky looked normal. The sun still shone. The birds still flew. Nothing in the heavens had changed. And that was exactly what made it frightening. Because judgment doesn't always come with drama. Sometimes it comes with clarity. In the afternoon, the waterline changed. Not violently, not suddenly. Just enough to be noticed by someone paying attention. The river crept higher on the bank, as if stretching its legs after a long sleep. A few huts near the edge felt damp around the base. Villagers frowned, shrugged, and returned to their celebrations. They thought it was nothing. They thought water always behaved like a servant. That night, the village held another festival. They told themselves the mermaid would return. They told themselves the river would forgive them. They told themselves that what had happened was temporary, because people who live in entitlement always believe consequences are negotiable. Then the river rose again, still calm, still quiet, still without anger. It moved like a decision. Water entered the paths between huts. Then it entered the huts themselves. People stepped outside and stared at it with confusion. Not fear yet, confusion. The kind that happens when reality refuses to cooperate with what you believed you deserved. By morning, the panic could no longer be denied. The river had swallowed the first row of homes near the shore, not dramatically, cleanly, as if reclaiming what belonged to it. Gold floated briefly on the surface, then sank. Shrines leaned, cracked, and fell into the water. The villagers ran from house to house, trying to carry what they could, but they realized something humiliating. Gold is heavy when you have to save yourself. They shouted prayers. Some shouted apologies. Some shouted blame. But the river did not change its pace, because the river was not negotiating. It was correcting. Hours later, the village looked smaller. Not because huts were destroyed, but because the river had rewritten the map. Fields disappeared beneath water. Paths vanished. The places where children once ran became quiet pools reflecting the sky. The villagers stood in clusters, breathing hard, staring at the water like it was an enemy. But the river was not their enemy. It was simply their reminder. And that was when the truth finally landed. Not as a scream. As a sentence the heart cannot argue with. They were never owners. They were only visitors. They had turned a blessing into a machine. They had taken generosity and demanded it become a law. And when the law of the river met the law of greed, greed lost. By sunset, the water stopped rising. It didn't need to continue. The message had been delivered. The village was broken into silence, and the river flowed forward, calm again, as if nothing had happened, as if it had simply returned to being what it always was, ancient, steady, and beyond bargaining. In the mud, survivors stood and stared at what was left. Hands empty, faces stripped of gold, eyes finally clear. And in that silence, the storyteller spoke again, his voice softer than any drum. He said, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world, and all who live in it." Psalm 24:1. And the village finally understood. The water gave them wealth, then took everything back. Not because it hated them, but because it refused to belong to greed. Before you go, answer this in the comments. At what exact moment did the blessing become a curse? Was it when they stopped saying thank you? Or when they decided the gift belonged to them? And be honest. If you were in that village, would you have walked away or joined the crowd? If this story taught you something, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Chronicles by Gina, because here, every story ends with truth.